Okay, let's continue with differential privacy. So, as I said, the second half will be a bit more technical with regard to, at least after for the confidentially using encryption. We'll go a bit into more depth. Differential privacy will come up in 2 weeks again with more details even, how it works and how you can apply it. Today I want you to get a bit a feeling of what differential privacy is and also what people tried to make sure that the data is kept anonymous and that you can keep confidentiality in your data, and how most of the times just because you put some encryption on it and because you do something special doesn't mean that the data is actually more secure. Okay, differential privacy. Let's start with an example. If there is an online survey that asks you whether you use streaming, if yes, how many movies you stream, what is your gender and what is your age. If you ask the question, what would you make, what would it take to make you secure that nobody will abuse your information? Because in fact, you would not want to be de-anonymized and find out that you're streaming movies, wouldn't you? Even though most probably 100% of the audience here does it. But besides that, okay. But if you participate in the survey, you would like to stay anonymous. So yeah, coming back to notations afterwards, I would feel safe if my answers would not impact the results. So here I have this notation. It's taking of the original paper that talks about differential privacy. So my answers would not impact the result. This Q here is in fact now this query that is run on the data set. So I have the data set here, and then I can run a query. So I can, for example, ask what is the mean age of everybody who already streamed movies, or I could ask what is the percentage of people of male that watch that use streaming. That would be the Q here. So I would say the Q of everybody but me excluded should be the same as the Q with me included. So my answer should not change the outcoming result. Yeah, it's good. It doesn't make sense. We'll see that. Okay. And we also say we would feel safe if an attacker looking just at the results, just looking at the outcome, would not learn anything about me. So if there is a probability that I have a secret, given this outcome, it should be the same as the secret about me. So for example, if the outcome is the average age of people streaming is 25, and the secret here is I'm 50, and somebody says, well, you're twice the age of everybody in this room, I would like this not to get out. Okay? Now, does that even make sense? In fact, no, as you correctly said, it doesn't make sense, because if I want the answer without my, if I want the query, so the result without my answer being the same as the query with my answer, that means that no answer will ever get into the query, so ever get to the result. So in fact, the result will always be the result of the empty set. And that's not interesting. So you just don't know who watched movies. So that's not an interesting thing. So you cannot say, I don't want the result to be influenced by how I answer. It doesn't make sense. Second, also, if there's a strong trend in the population, I took that example, I'm 25, and so if oh no, that was the other way around. If I'm 25 and male, and most men between 20 and 30 use streaming, then I'm using it probably too, whether I participated in the survey or not. It will just be a fact. And the other way around, the example I gave, if I'm twice the average of the streaming user, whether I participate in the survey or not, you'll know my age. It's not true, in fact. I'm younger than that. Okay. So, no. So the previous assumptions, they don't make sense. We cannot say we don't want to influence the result. Doesn't make sense. Now, what we can do is we can say that so Q of D is the query including my answers, and Q of D minus I is the query without my answers. Now I could say I want this thing here to be smaller than some epsilon. So if I participate, I don't want to influence the result more than a given epsilon, or e to the epsilon here. And so this epsilon is now called a privacy budget. And I can adjust my algorithm so to respect a certain privacy budget. And this is now something very interesting, because I can say, well, for some answers, the privacy budget can be quite quite high. So if the epsilon is high, it gives away more data. So there might be some answers where I don't really care if people know that I participated. So the epsilon can be quite high. And there can be answers where I want to choose a small epsilon. So to make that, my participation does not influence a lot the result. Okay, you will get more details in 2 weeks' time. For the moment, you need to just take away this epsilon here that is called the privacy budget, where we can influence how much your participation in the survey will reflect on the results here. So that's the most important thing. And this is something that is very interesting, because you can limit the harm of the results to the results themselves. As I said, if you know that on average the streaming user is 25 and male, well, that's some kind of harm, because everybody who is 25 and male is then under suspicion. But we can limit it to that. And we can also say that the results are more or less independent of who participated or not. So we cannot remove a data set and then look whether the output changes a lot. So that's always the problem. If you have the list of all the answers and you have the result, now if you remove one entry from that list and you recalculate the result, if that is very different, you know that the guy that you removed had a big influence on the result. So you know that he probably is one of the streaming users. So if the streaming is yes or no, and you remove it, and the average usage goes down a bit, you know that he probably did stream. So this is always the problem with that you try to solve with differential privacy. Yeah. And then, yeah, we can choose this level here to protect the privacy of the people. You can apply this to a lot of things, to the surveys submitted. You can apply it also to medical data. So if you want to make statistics on HIV or other illnesses, and you can also have it on bug reports, search queries, viewing habits. Apple, a bit more than a year ago, started to collect your data, but not your data. It's a very nice system where all your search queries are sent to Apple, but not all your search queries. So with a random chance, your search queries are garbled, are changed in a way that you cannot know whether it's a changed query or whether it's the original query. So if they get a query saying building bombs or something like that, you can always say, well, it is differential privacy. They just randomly attributed the search query making a bomb to me. It was not me. And so they will say, well, yes, effectively there's a chance that it was not you, so you cannot be held accountable for that. And the same thing, they do this with bug reports. And the nice thing about this is that if you have a lot of people, all these changes that you do, they equal out. And in the end, because you have a lot of noise and you just have a distribution, and it all sums out in the end, so you don't really care that you change from time to time a query. For Apple, it's the same. They still know whether people are interested in Apple or in Android. So they still know whether they need to make more advertisements or not to get a bit more people to Apple, but they don't know who did what. So everybody is happy. So DP is really a very good tool, but it's sometimes a bit difficult to apply, and sometimes it can have very negative adverse effects. There was a very nice paper that talked about warfarin. Should have looked up how to pronounce that. Warfarin. Warfarin is a blood thinner. It's very nice if you want to kill rats. You put warfarin on the floor, and they eat it, and then they bleed to death. That's the rat poison that you commonly buy. It's warfarin. But you can also use it to give people a better life. So if you had a heart stroke at one moment in time, then you can take some warfarin, so your blood gets thinner, so you have less chance of getting a blood stroke. Now, of course, the problem is if you have a lot of warfarin, well, you might have inner bleedings. That's not good. If you have too little warfarin, well, you might get another heart stroke. That's not good neither. So you have this therapeutic window here where you have a little warfarin, but not too much. Okay? And this window here, in fact, depends on some genetics of you. It depends on your age, depends on your gender, depends on a lot of things. Now, this is something that you can do machine learning. So we're not talking about the machine learning part here. We just have population data set. We try out. Some people bleed to death, sorry. Some people have another heart stroke, sorry again. But we learn from time to time, and in the end, we know that taking the genotype, so looking at some part of the DNA, and clinical variables, whether it's male, female, age, and so, we can then, using the trained model, we can know how much warfarin is good for this person so that he doesn't bleed to death and that he doesn't have another stroke. So this is very nice. And people did that, and it's going very nice. Now, some privacy-preserving people said, yes, but this means that if I know your warfarin dose, I can put it into the linear model, and I can know your race, your age, your weight. I can get all that out just from your warfarin dose by going through that linear model. And that's not good. I need to protect your data. So I don't want to give the exact warfarin dose. I need to differential privatize a bit, so put some random amount, yeah, you're laughing, exactly. Put some random amount to it, and so this is my title. This much privacy kills this many people. This is my title. They had a much more elaborate title, but this is more or less what the paper says. So it says, okay, you can put some privacy-preserving stuff in there. You can use some differential privacy. You can add some error to all that, but we can show you how much error, so this is again this epsilon, this privacy budget, so how much privacy budget you want and how the mortality, well, here it goes down, because if you have a higher privacy budget, that means you give away more information. So the more information you give away, the lower the mortality, of course. But the less information you want to give away, the higher the mortality. So it is a very nice paper that showed if you want to do privacy preserving on stuff like that, well, you actually kill people. So that was a damper for some of the privacy preserving folks who said everything needs to be privacy preserved. And yeah, in the end, people said, well, is it really a problem? If you can go from the warfarin to the race, is it really a problem? Now, in some settings, it might. In other settings, you just say, well, okay, they know my race. Too bad. But it was very, very nice paper to say, okay, if you have this privacy budget, you will kill this many more people. That was very, very good. Okay, speak up, differential privacy. Just a very short question. Differential privacy. Yes, something like that. Yeah. So which of the following might be made more private using differential privacy? So can you make more private an online survey, documents stored on the cloud, automatic bug reports, or statistics on web usage. Which of those can be made more private using differential privacy? And by the way, you can also always ask questions on the speak up. So I ask the TAs to keep an eye if you have questions or so. It can be about the course, it can be about something else. Okay, so which of these three might make sense in a differential privacy setting? Okay. Is it? No. Okay. Yeah, so the first one was the example we gave. Very good. You followed the course. Thanks. Documents stored on the cloud. Effectively, you cannot privacy preserve the documents that you stored on the cloud. Automatic bug reports. That is, in fact, one place where it could also apply. What is a problem with if you send automatic bug reports to Microsoft? What privacy you're losing there? In fact, yes?
That they know what software you're using potentially.
Exactly.
The specification of the machine and so on.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you send a bug report for Tor, they know, oh, you're using Tor. So you might get on a blacklist for some reason. Statistics on web usage. Took that example also with search results or web usages in general. What websites you're visiting or so. Okay. Yes, so there are two things that I have for today. So this confidentiality using encryption. This will most probably not be directly in the final exam. But I think it's important to see to what lengths people go to protect things. Yeah, she's smiling, going home. It's sunny. Go outside. Very good. But it's still very interesting to see to what length people go to protect the privacy, to what length people try to make a real nice and shiny model that is cool, that is good, and then how it is broken in the end. Okay, let's start with a property preserving encryption at the example of cryptDB. I lost my window where I also see the text here. Okay, so cryptDB uses something called property preserving encryption. That's a special field of encryption, of cryptography, where you can encrypt something, but it's not completely randomized. So you can leave some information, for example, for indexing. So if you have a database, it's very, very nice. Range queries, if you want to say, for example, I have this database, and then you go to the server and say, now give me everybody aged 20 to 30. But this query, in fact, is encrypted, so the server does not know what you're looking for, and just does the comparison, and then returns you the result. The only thing the server knows is how many results he returns to you. But he doesn't know what you searched, not what the results were. And then you can decrypt everything. Yeah, you can data clustering, general computations with homomorphic encryption. And yeah, so it would also be used for anonymization as long as the key, of course, is not getting public. Yeah, that's a bit technical, not really important here. So here we say that, so this property preserving encryption, we give here, this is a function that takes some encrypted messages and gives us out a 0 or a 1. And now this function can be anything. It could be 0, it's not the same, 1, it's the same. It could be 0, that the first element is smaller than the second element, and 1, the first element is greater or equal to the second element. You can have different properties there. You can have order-preserving encryption. That means, I have an example for that just afterwards, where you encrypt data, and then even in the encrypted space, you can compare it to know what is greater than the other thing. Or you can have deterministic encryption, where the same clear text always gets the same ciphertext, and then if you search, you encrypt the search thing, you send it to the server, he compares it everywhere and returns to you the result. But because the server doesn't have the private key, he doesn't know what you searched. He just knows, okay, I returned 5 results. Yeah. No, computer is going to sleep. Oh yeah, I would like to. Okay, so a small example for the order-preserving encryption here. So I have some clear text and corresponding encryption. Now what I can do, I can sort the encryption, and if I look at the corresponding clear text, they're also sorted. So that's a very nice property here. Now, of course, the server will only have this part here. The server should never see the clear text, only has the encrypted part. Now, CryptDB is a bit a monster in that you have a database here where you have all the data held, and then you have some kind of database proxy that now plays with this data. And every query from a user goes first through an application server, then to that proxy server, and finally it talks to the database manager here to get the queries, and then it decrypts it here and gives it back to the application. They're doing this in so-called onion layers. So the value that you store in a database is in fact encrypted in different layers. The inner layer is the most close to the actual value. The inner layer is also the one that is the most attackable, that is the most vulnerable. And the more you get out, the more general it gets. The most outer layer here is just random. There's of course no functionality. So if you randomly encrypt something, if you just replace it with a random value, you only know there was something there, you don't know what was there. So for some queries, you might just want to know how many people are in this room. So the number of results is okay, you don't want to have anything, so it's okay if all the values are replaced by random. For some other queries, you might want to select on the equality or do database joins. So this is this onion encryption, and then according to the query you make to the server will only return the outermost onion that will reply to your query, and then send back to you that, so that you don't get any, the server doesn't know anything about what you ask and doesn't know anything about the returned value. Oh yeah, already advanced time. Just without speak up, just like that. So we have this deterministic encryption here for equality selection. Do you know some of these encryption schemes? That is something that you should be able to reply, in fact. Well, do you know homomorphic encryption? Yes? No? Okay, what is homomorphic encryption?
Homomorphic encryption, for example, can preserve, for example, if you sum two plain text, the result is the same as if we, so the encrypting the sum of two plain texts is the same as encrypting two plain texts and then summing the ciphertext, or can it be the same for multiplication, for example?
Okay.
The example I know.
So the server can apply functions on the encrypted data. Okay, so you send encrypted data to the server, and then the server can, for example, sum these encryptions and give it back to you, and you can decrypt it. And the sum that the server did, in fact, even makes sense on the decrypted side. Yeah. That's homomorphic encryption. But homomorphic encryption, would that be useful for this deterministic comparison? Huh? No, why not? Well,
like usually you have homomorphic but non-deterministic
exactly.
encryption schemes.
Yeah.
And having homomorphic and deterministic, I think is really hard. So
yeah.
And having security at the same time. So
yeah, no security you don't have it then because you could just you don't have a lot of security if it's deterministic homomorphic.
Yeah, it depends so much on the type of security you can choose.
Yeah.
But
most of the time not. Okay. El Gamal, you know El Gamal? It's one of the most basic encryption schemes that is also non-deterministic, so you cannot use it for a deterministic comparison. AES encryption. Yes. Yes. Why yes?
Because AES is deterministic given that the key is the same.
Yeah, so I added here using a static key. So you use always the same key, and AES is a block cipher, so with the same key and the same input, you always get the same ciphertext. So here, for example, for this DET in the onion, you could use AES. RSA is again a public-private encryption scheme, so that would not work. And because RSA usually you also have non-deterministic encryption in the end. RSA usually you also have non-deterministic encryption schemes usually.
Yes.
No.
Yes. It depends. Yeah, it depends on the implementation of the textbook here.
Yes, you can. Or do you take a symmetric key and then you do block cipher? And
no, like the textbook RSA is deterministic. You just take x to the power of d and x to the power of e modulo.
Aha. Okay.
But the one which is used in practice, I think it's non-deterministic because usually public key crypto systems are non-deterministic.
Most of them are not. Yeah. Somebody else want to say something?
I mean,
No?
Is RSA just modular exponentiation with a given? So if we have a given key pair,
Yes.
the parameters of the exponentiation are fixed, so it should be.
So then it should be also deterministic. Okay, so that one would also work then. Yeah. And finally, replacing it with a random value would not work because you cannot deterministically do it. Exactly. Okay, so there were, as I said, afterwards there were some people who were able to attack this cryptDB. One of the problems with this property preserving encryptions is if you have, for example, an encryption where you have order preserving, one thing you can do is you can compare with a known value. So you can take a value that you know and you encrypt it, and then you can know whether you are below or above the value that you want to attack. And then you can know exactly where the value is by just always adjusting your guess. And they did this with some hospitals where they just took the database, they encrypted it using cryptDB, and then they looked whether they would be able to recover the information stored in the database. Most of the time, they had to use some known list of people who were in the hospital, but where they didn't know when they were, not what their illness was, or how long they were in the hospital. And so using cryptDB, just in the plain cryptDB, they were able to attack it and recover most of the information of these patients in there. So they showed that cryptDB, even though they have this very nice layer of different confidentiality levels, it's of no use if you can make repeated requests and then just try out different things. So it's a very nice system, but unfortunately it doesn't hold up to an attacker that has good resources. Yeah, so this is if there is a similar reference data set is available. So if you know which people are in the hospital. Okay. So they did not find the Holy Grail yet, knowing what is really, really good. Then there is another thing called the BOPET, which tries to make it even more complicated. So it's a property revealing encryption. It's now an encryption where we can not only have one bit of data. If you have two encrypted data, we don't only have one bit of data, but we can get much more. The server can get more data out of it by comparing two encrypted data sets. And then the idea is to have the data being able to recrypt under another user. So every user here has his private key, and the server only knows the public key. So the user encrypts the data, sends it to the server. And one example is if you have documents, so different people encrypt their documents, send it to the server, but they want to be able to search the documents. That's, for example, for journalists, that's a very nice thing to do. Journalists, they have their very confidential papers. They don't want anybody to read those papers, but they want to send it to a server and being able to search these documents. And then if somebody finds a match on the document, they will have to call the journalist and say, hey, I found a match, would you mind sharing that document? And then the journalist can say, hey, okay, I know you, I share the document, or say, no, I don't know you, I don't trust you, I don't give you the document. Then it would be up to the journalist to share that or not. So the goal here is to do searches and comparisons on the server side, and then the server does not know what the search term is, does not know what is in the document, but is able to return the document to the user. Now this BOPET with this multi-key searchable encryption, the goal was to have an easy way of the user sending a document encrypted only once, and then all the other users that this user trusts can search on these documents. So the most simple way to do is that if you have 10 users and you want to share it with 10 people, you encrypt the document to all the 10 people. That's the simplest way. But that's very hard, and if you have an 11th guy, then you need to re-encrypt all the documents to the 11th guy. That's very hard to set up. So what this BOPET is doing is they have some kind of differential keys. So when an 11th user comes in and I trust him, I can create a differential key between my key and his key. And so the server can take this differential key and take the search request and then directly apply it to his documents too. So if I have a search request, I send it under my key. The server changes the encryption using this differential key to the 11th user and then runs it on his documents. And so I don't need to re-encrypt all my document when a new user comes in. So again, they made a thing called Mylar, where they made a very nice app that allowed to write JavaScript applications, and they made some example application. Here they made a chat application and showed how you can use these BOPETs to make it secure, and only the people that you trust will be able to search and get the documents, and the people you don't trust, they will not be able to get the documents. And then again, other researchers came and used that tool, and then had three different threat models. So one threat was the attacker just gets a one-time snapshot. So he's just able to get into the server, copy all the database, and then he loses access. A second attacker, he can get multiple snapshots of the database. And then the third attacker that in fact the Mylar people said they could protect against, the third attacker is in the server and also has one of the users with which he can collude, so with which he can work together. And the Mylar people said that they can protect against that, and this paper showed that in the end, no. So for, again, the nice guy. So for the one time, they could, for all applications, retrieve at least some information. Because every time you make these requests, you still keep some information around. And he was able to still, so for the chat application, he still got the topic of the room, because that was still put in plain text, so you get it. Too bad, that was not encrypted. For the medical application, you could get some relationship between the documents and the patient, so that can always, you know, a bit who went how many times to the doctor. That might already be too leaky. And the OpenDNA, so they had a big database where you could put some part of your DNA and then search for this part, and then in return you got what kind of sicknesses this DNA gives usually. So what kind of illnesses gives. But when you search, you give the length of the SNP, and that's a bit, again, a metadata attack. So you know the length of the part of the DNA you're looking for, so you know more or less what kind of illness the guy is afraid of having. So already leaked that. It gets worse if the attacker can get repeated access to the server. And again, the Miller people said, no, he cannot get everything, cannot get anything. But they managed to get more data about the patients, and they made a shop application. They also managed to get some inside of the shop. And finally, if they were able to collude, they were able to detect everything because they could just search repeatedly and trying out different search terms till they found a document that was useful, and then they could download the document. So again, the Miller people, they were very keen on having found, again, the Holy Grail, on having found something that is unbreakable and all, but their attack model was a bit flawed, and some parts they still kept in clear where they shouldn't have it, had in clear, and in the end, the attackers managed to break this thing too. So takeaway here is, if you have this personally identifiable information that you really want to protect, neither something like CryptDB nor something like this MKSC will help you. And this will be very important also with regard, I don't know, have you guys already heard of GDPR? I think that comes into later. Was that already in the lecture, or? But that was it with the PII perhaps. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the GDPR, this new European Union law that will come, I think, 1st of May, if I'm correct. So very soon, in a couple of days. Stuff like this will have to be implemented, so hospitals, they need to take care. If you collect data, you need to treat it well, else you can get quite heavy fines. So this is very important. Okay, now speak up for the day. One for the road, best privacy protection. So that's also for, so what is the best privacy protection that you can do? Is it encrypting everything on the server, as we saw with CryptDB and MKSA, only collect relevant data, anonymize data as soon as it exists, as it exits the server. So if you want to publicly make available the data, you anonymize it, or should you always aggregate data whenever possible, like we saw that you can bin the data, the age, or the height, or whatever. Yeah. So as we saw, encrypting on the server is good, but is often not enough. You can lose the key, somebody can attack it, somebody can have metadata at all. Anonymize data as soon as it exits the server, that's of course something you need to do, but that's not enough. Aggregation is always possible, but the same, and I think that was also in the PII lecture, the best is still you don't collect data that you don't need. That's the most important getaway, and I think that's very, very important to know. You're all engineers, you will all go out there, you will build databases, you will have to talk with the guys, what they need to do, what they don't need to do. So if you can keep in mind that the best thing to keep things a bit private is not to collect too much data. That's really the number one if the data is not there, you cannot leak it. It's stupid, but it's simple, but it works. So, and then yes, if you aggregate it, that's also possible, and then of course anonymize it. Okay, I think that was more or less everything I had for today. Yeah, anonymity and privacy is very hard. Limit what is revealed. Limit what is collected in the first place. And if you want to release anonymized sets, you need very good preparation. And you need to be up to date. What are the latest attacks? What are the latest possibility to de-anonymize the data? Else you will get into trouble. And by the way, the AOL people who released the datasets were fired. So don't get into that position. Okay, that was all for today. And yeah, so next week, Brian will again be giving the course. Okay, have a nice evening.